Hey, what's up you guys? So today we are out here in Smithville, Tennessee at my buddy's house. I had to stop here, help him get his bow set up, and then we are going to Pennsylvania on a black bear hunt. And I told you guys I was going to do an arrow build for the Black Eagle X Impacts, and so I'm going to go ahead and run through my entire arrow build from basically pulling them out of the box to actually going out and hunting with them. So the first thing that I do is I'll take them out, put them on an arrow spinner, check both sides, see which side wobbles the most. I'll mark that side, and then after I mark that side, I'll know which side to cut off of to decrease the amount of wobble in that arrow totally. If both sides are wobbling same amount, I'll just mark both sides, and then whatever amount that I need to cut off the shaft, I just divide that in two and cut that amount off of both sides. So we did that already, and then after I did that, we went ahead and took a spine tester, put them on a spine tester, and marked all the indexed all the spines. So we marked the spot where the spine was the strongest on the spine, and then from there we pretty much just packed up and got here. So we are at that point right now. From this point forward, we're going to go ahead and take the arrows and start veining them up and putting points in, putting knock bushings in, and putting our knocks in. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to go ahead and be using the Thorn broadheads. These are the glue-in broadheads, the ones that accept the gold tip fact weight system. So we're going to be using these Thorn 2.2 inch cut diameter, 120 grain broadheads. Now these broadheads say that they're 120 grains, but I've measured, I don't know about these, I haven't measured these, but I have measured about 5 or 6 of these now, and every one that I've measured has come out to be like 115 to 116 grains. So I don't know if it's just a factory thing that they do, and I don't know the reasons for it, but every one that I've weighed so far has come out to be way light. Yeah, this one's 116 as well. I'll put like a close-up on in the video. I don't understand why they're 4 to 5 grains lighter. So, but I mean, you can always, they do accept the fact weight system, so you can get the fact weight system, and if you want it to be 120 grains on the dot, they have the 5 grain inserts for this, so you can go ahead and get those. I'm going to be running 25 grains on the back, so that puts the actual point weight at around, if you minus the 5 grains off, it's going to be around 135 grains, 130 grains, 130 grain point. So no, 25 grains is 140, dude. So they're going to be 140 grains. All right, so the points are going to be 140 grains. We're going to go ahead and take the points and start putting our pre-installed, put together fact weight system, I guess bars into the back side of these broadheads. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take these fact weight systems and put some hot melt on the threads and install them into all of the broadheads here. These pieces just screw into the back side of the broadhead. So you can just heat up some hot melt and put some hot melt on the threads, which is what I do, and then just thread these things in. All right, so we've got all the broadheads built. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take our arrows, and we're going to put knock bushings in the ends of all of our arrows. So let's go ahead and start on that. All right, that'll give us the little donut of hot melt. So we'll let those dry for a minute. While they're drying, I'll put up all these shear pins. I'll keep out 6 for the actual broadheads that we're going to do, but I keep a little bag of the shear pins, and I just put them in there every time I get new ones. And then I already have practice clips on my practice arrows, so I'll go ahead and put up the practice clips as well. So while those are drying, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how I choose how to build my arrows. So I want to have a good ratio between speed and kinetic energy, because both of those come into factor when you're hunting, just like it does, not so much kinetic energy, I guess, but speed comes into factor when you're shooting tournament archery. And arrow weight does as well, because arrow weight correlates into less wind drift. The higher your arrow weight is, the less the wind can push your arrow around. So you still have kind of the same relation there, but you want to have a good balance between kinetic energy and speed. So I wanted my arrows to still be around 300 foot a second, but also high enough in kinetic energy that I could kill pretty much anything across the country. So I built my arrows to where they're shooting at about 95 pounds of kinetic energy straight out of my bow, and then at like 70 or 80 yards, I still am getting 75 pounds of kinetic energy out of my arrows, and they're still shooting 308 feet a second. So, because I was originally building these arrows at about 460 grains, but then I backed that off, and I'm building them now at about 100 or 420 or 430. Can't remember. We'll weigh them at the end to make sure, but I think they're going to be around 420. And but that gives me a really, really good kinetic energy to speed ratio. So that's kind of the way that I look at my arrows before I build them. I don't build them to do just to be as heavy as possible, just to have the highest point weight. I think that's an important thing to look at, your point weight and all that. I build them to have a good balanced arrow, and I'm not talking about balance as in like where the balance of the arrow is. I'm talking about a balance of aspects to the arrow and the way that you're going to be able to perform with that arrow. All right, so these should be dry now, so we'll go ahead and pull these donut rings off of these arrows. All right, so let's go ahead and put the broadheads on these. All right, so now that we have all of our knock bushings on our arrows, the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the broadhead for that arrow on the arrow. And then what I'll do from there is I'll go ahead and put a shear pin in it and a practice clip into the broadhead. So there's the shear pin, and then we'll go ahead and throw the practice clip on the broadhead. And anytime I put a shear pin in a broadhead on one of these broadheads, and I don't want it to be cut through, I always put a practice clip on, just because I've not thought about it so many times and pushed on the broadhead for whatever reason, and it's came back and cut my shear pin, and then I'm like, oh, now I got to get a new shear pin for it. So I always make sure that I put a practice clip in if I don't want to cut the shear pin. All right, so we'll go ahead and take the excess that's hanging out on this and we'll cut it. And I'll save these, and I'll actually use these as like extra shear pins too, just in case I run out for whatever reason. I'll save these, and in a pinch, that will still work as a shear pin. You just have to run it in far enough to where it's thick enough for it. And then also on the back side of this shear pin, I use the little rubber piece on the back side of those two. So I'll cut off like the little divots, and then I'll just put a little divot somewhere along it, and I'll pull that through and use that as well. Okay, so now that we have the broadhead on the arrow, shear pin in it, and a practice clip on it, what I'm going to do from there is I'll take all my broadheads and I will put them on a arrow spinner, and I'll spin the arrow to see the wobble in the broadhead. So this is what I call indexing the broadheads. So I index each broadhead. I'll just turn it slightly until I see the broadhead stays more stationary. And you'll find, or at least I've found that whenever you do this, you'll find a spot on the arrow based off of the broadhead that spins really true to center. Like this spot right here is really flat. It's really flat spinning. So, and I thought, you know, when I first started doing this, and I was like, well, my arrow must be out of square, because the only way that should make sense is if my shaft's sitting crooked, like if it's cut at an angle somehow. But I always make sure that I square up each end of my arrows. That's one of the steps that I do before I even start looking at components. I do that between, I do that last, actually. I do that right before I start putting all of my components in. And then I clean all the surface area inside the shaft where the components are going to go. So I don't think my arrows are unsquare, like the end of them are unsquare. I think it's just something to do with the metal. Maybe the metal's a little bit bent somewhere, I don't know. But there is definitely, from what I've found, a sweet spot where the broadhead sits on the arrow. And then from there, I'll just take a silver Sharpie or something, and I will mark along the broadhead and the arrow so that I know exactly how to line that up when I start putting the hot melt on the broadhead. Alright, so we got our Sharpie. We're going to go ahead, and I'm going to just try to match it up with the strong side spine mark that I have. And I'm just going to mark the arrow. Alright, so once we get that indexed, from there, I'll go ahead and glue the broadhead into the shaft. These have a little bit of a hot melt ring on them as well, so we might peel those off. So I use hot melt on everything on my arrows except for my fletches, so even my points. And since I've been doing this, I've only had one point come out in a target, and I've shot thousands of arrows. And I'm not even 100% sure that it was because of the hot melt that it came out in the target, and if it was because of the hot melt, it might have been because of me, because of something that I did, because it was when I very first started doing this. So maybe I just didn't put enough on or something. But you do have to cake this stuff on. I would suggest, if you're going to use hot melt, to make sure that you're using a lot on your points, because you want to make sure you get in every nook and cranny and like all the crevices of the broadhead or the point or whatever. You want to make sure that you fill up all those troughs on these things, because if you don't, then it has less continuity with the arrow itself. This is the point where I've broken many shear pins, because I always forget to put the practice clip on before I actually go ahead and install the broadhead. Perfect. Let that dry. Alright, so I'll go ahead and index all the broadheads to their arrows, install all the broadheads, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so we got all the broadheads installed. From here, we're going to go ahead and throw each arrow in the fletching jig, fletch them up. I generally use a 4-fletch configuration on pretty much everything that I do. When you vein arrows, the surface area doesn't change when you make it 4 fletches, versus if you want to get the same result that a 4-fletch can give you by giving your arrow a little bit more drag at the end and giving it a little bit better steering capabilities from the backside. The only way to do that is to lengthen the vein. So I like to use the 4-fletch configuration because I feel like it gives you a little bit more steering while limiting wind drag. And the reason for it is because when the arrow's spinning as fast as it can, the surface area width-wise isn't going to change when you add an extra vein, and it's not going to change the length. So when you're adding length, you're adding surface area for the wind to touch. So I'll get off that soapbox, but we'll go ahead and start putting these arrows in the fletching jig and veining them up. Right? And then from here, what I like to do is I'll go ahead and I'll set this arrow up where the strong side of the spine is facing up. So right there it's facing up, and then I'll just go ahead and make a mark on the shaft towards the knock end so that I can have a point of reference on the back side of my arrow where the strong side of the spine is. And that way I can try to, since I'm shooting 4 vanes, I can try to split that mark between 2 vanes, and that way I can have the vanes like, I don't know, 4-fletched, have the vanes 4-fletched like this and still have the strong side pointing up. Alright, so now we got all the vanes installed on all the arrows. All 6 arrows have all 4 vanes. So let's go ahead and get the nocks on these things, and then let's get them on the scale. Alright, so that's the last arrow. So let's go ahead, throw these arrows on the scale, and see how much they weigh against each other. Alright, so number 1 is 416 grains. Then we have our next one, 415.4. Sorry about the shakiness, guys. 417.1. 415.3. 416.4. 417 flat. All right. So we're looking at about a grain and a half difference between all 6 arrows here. So that's not terrible. Generally, I try to get them a little bit closer. I try to get them within a half a grain. All right, so to talk about specs, obviously, I'm shooting about a 415 grain arrow. We'll call it 415. Shooting a 75-pound bow. That puts me at about 5.3 pounds per inch on my system. That puts me at around 308 feet a second. And then I'm shooting 90 pounds of kinetic energy, like I already mentioned. 90 pounds of kinetic energy straight out of the bow, and then 75 pounds of kinetic energy at 80 yards. So I can pretty much shoot anything on the planet with this setup, and I'm still shooting fast enough that I can shoot at 100 yards. I can comfortably shoot a shot at 100 yards with this setup the way that it is and still kill most animals on this earth. So I just think that having a good balance between kinetic energy and speed is very, very important for a hunting arrow setup. You also have to take into consideration front of center. Obviously, your front of center can't be awful, but if you keep it between the 7 and 15% ratio, you're going to be totally fine. You're going to be able to accurately and lethally harvest animals. So, but anyways, thank you guys for checking out the video. I hope it helped somebody out there out in some way. If you don't mind, please do like, share, subscribe, comment, do all that fun stuff, and save the video to your watch later list so that next time you're building hunting arrows, if you want to refer back to the video, you can. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.